We will start in Chapter 1, titled Understanding Counting, in the text How Children Learn Number Concepts by Kathy Richardson. On this slide, you can see how most of your standards that are taught in quarters 1 and 2 correlate with the information within this chapter. Counting is much more than reciting a rote sequence of numbers that has been memorized. The patterns and language of counting is learned way before a thorough understanding of counting is established. Counting is a complex concept, and there are several stages of thinking that students go through in order to develop a strong understanding. These stages are outlined in Chapter 1 as the critical learning phases. And there are 4 for understanding counting. Counting objects, knowing one more, one less, counting objects by group, and using symbols. Each of these critical learning phases for counting are broken down into many sub-phases. Please refer to your handout as we take a closer look at each one of these learning phases. Our first critical learning phase is counts one item for each number word. When starting, children point at objects while saying the counting sequence. They are not aware that they have to touch one object for each number word they say. Children who are at the beginning stage of learning to count will touch one counter each time they say a number. Children may have one-to-one for numbers up to 10 and then lose focus as numbers get larger. Children who understand this critical learning phase touch one counter each time they say a number. Some children who can determine one-to-one when counting do not realize each object must be counted once and only once. They do not pay attention to which counters they have and have not touched. Children who are aware that they need to keep track will not always be accurate. They may count correctly when they start out and then lose track as they go. They may be off by just 1 or 2 because they missed or recounted 1 or 2 objects. Sometimes they may be off because they skipped saying a number. At this stage, they understand what they need to do but are still inconsistent. Children need lots of practice until they can develop a system to keep track and count each object once and only once. Children who understand this critical learning phase consistently touch each item once and only once when they count. Children need to understand why keeping track is important. When children do not fully understand, it won't bother them when they end up with different amounts when recounting the same group of objects. Teachers need to be aware of and look for behaviors that indicate whether or not children understand the need to keep track. This cannot be fully determined unless we observe them in several settings to see how they handle situations when they're inaccurate. Do they notice? Are they bothered? Do they check and see? For children who have mastered this critical learning phase, they will react if an answer does not make sense and spontaneously check by recounting to see if the result is the same. Another important aspect of counting goes beyond being accurate to developing a sense of quantity. There are several stages that children move through in developing this awareness. At the early stage of counting, children do not know how many they have counted, even right after they finish counting. Therefore, their attention was on the action of counting and not on quantity. The number they landed on had no meaning to them. Some will guess while others will recount. When they recount, they usually pay more attention to the last number they said, if they can. The child, who can answer how many is more aware of the purpose of counting. They will be able to answer without having to recount. So children who understand this critical learning phase respond to the question, how many, with the number they landed on when they counted without needing to recount to find out. Counting out a particular quantity is an entirely different process. of counting than counting a given group of objects. There are two types of situations that require students to count out a number of groups. One is when someone asks them to get a specific number of items. For example, would you grab 7 tiles? Another is when you have the student determine the number themselves in order to get enough for everyone. For example, would you get enough tiles for everyone in your group? Counting out a particular number requires children to hold the number in their mind while they are counting. This means that the number must have enough meaning to them that they remember it while they are counting. When the number has little to no meaning to them, they do not hold that amount in their mind and count past what has been asked for. The next stage is when they hear themselves say the number asked for as they count and are reminded that they are supposed to count out that particular number. To be successful, they have to hold the number in their mind while they are counting. They will begin by forgetting the number and then move to hearing themselves say the number as they count. They will then be able to self-correct and start over to fix their mistakes. Children who understand the critical learning phase can easily and consistently count out a particular quantity. We have a video here, and I want you to take a moment and look at the video. This is a video of a student who was asked to count out a particular quantity. As you are watching the video, please pay attention to how the child is counting and tracking and what critical learning phase or phases this student has mastered or not yet mastered. So take a minute and pause this video to review the counting method that the student used in the video. How did he track the counters in front of him, and which critical learning phase has the student mastered and or not yet mastered?